how many answers will we get from each of these? 2. How do you know just by looking at the equation how many answers we're going to find? Exponent. Because of this squared here, that's the biggest exponent that there is anywhere in this equation, so that tells me that there are 2 solutions. Number 1, there's 2 different ways to solve this. I want to make sure that you guys know of both ways, so you can pick which way you like better. One of the things that we could do here would be to add 64 to both sides. So then I would have x squared equals 64. What could I do from there?
Divide.
You were right the first time.
Okay.
Not subtract. I thought I heard another S word.
So,
I want to get rid of the squared. Square root. Square rooting will get rid of a squared. So the squared and the square root will cancel each other out there. So I would have x equals, how many answers do we get though when we take a square root as part of this process? 2. One that is positive and the other is negative. So I'm going to have plus or minus the square root of 64. Is 64 one of those numbers that you guys know the square root of? What is the square root of 64? 8. So x is equal to positive or negative 8. So I would say x equals 8 or x equals negative 8. So that's one way that you could go about solving this one. That's called the square root method because we used a square root as we were solving it. Or you can solve this one by factoring. So if I have x squared minus 64 equals 0, and I'm going to solve this using the factoring method, I want it equal to 0, so I'm happy about that. Does it have a GCF? Is there anything that goes into both x squared and 64 at the same time? Nope. So no GCF. How many terms do we have? 2 terms. This is one of those special situations. Whenever we have only 2 terms, it's always going to be a special situation. This is a difference of 2 squares. When we go to factor a difference of 2 squares, our 2 factors are going to be almost identical, but one will have a plus and one will have a minus. The first term up here is x squared. What is the square root of x squared? X. Since that's the first term up there, it goes the first place in both of my factors. And then I look at this other number back here. You guys already told me the square root of 64 is what? 8. That would go at the back of each of my factors. And then I take each of these factors and set them equal to 0 to solve them. So here I would subtract 8 from both sides, and I would have that x is negative 8. Over here I can add 8 to both sides, and I get that x is positive 8. So I got the exact same 2 answers using a different method. Unless the directions are asking you to use one particular method over another, I don't care which way you decide to do it. As long as what you're doing is mathematically valid. On number 2, Do you guys want to use the square root method, like the first way we did number 1? Or do you want to do it by factoring, the second way? Number 2, we can either use this method to solve it, or we can use this method. Which one do you guys want to do? Square root 1? All right. So what's the first thing I would need to do here if I'm going to solve it using the square root method? Add 36 to both sides. So I have 2x squared equals 36. Can I square root it yet? No. What do I need to do to this before I can take a square root? I need to divide both sides by 2. What is half of 36? 18. So I have x squared equals 18. What can I do now? Now I can take the square root of both sides. And when we take the square root of both sides, we get how many answers? 2. One that is positive and the other is negative. So plus or minus the square root of 18. On the last problem when we got to this point, you guys said, oh, we know the square root of 64. Do you know the square root of 18? I don't either. So we have to try to break it down. I'm going to do my work for that over here. What numbers will multiply to give you 18? 6 and 3. Do we know the square root of 6? Off the top of our head? No. What about the square root of 3? I don't know that one either. Can I break either one of those down more? 6. What 2 numbers multiply to give me 6? 3 and 2. And then I still have this 3 here. Do I have any doubles under there? Yeah, I've got 3 and 3, right? 3 times 3 gives me 9. Do we know the square root of 9? 3. So I'd have the square root of 9 times 2. That's also 18, right? So square root of 9 times the square root of 2. I have 3. Do we know the square root of 2? Then I just leave it as the square root of 2 because I can't break that one down anymore. So that means that x is equal to plus or minus 3 square root of 2. So x is equal to 3 square root of 2, or x is equal to negative 3 square root of 2. All right, last one. Where do I start this one at? What's my first step? Add 16 to both sides. So I would have negative x squared equals 16. What next? Multiply both sides by -1. Or I can divide by -1. It has the exact same result. Because of the amount of space I have on the board, I'm going to write it down like this. But if you times it both by -1, same exact thing. So x squared equals -16. Is my x squared all alone? Yes. So now what can I do to it? Square root it. If we do it to one side, I have to do it to the other side. X equals plus or minus the square root of -16. Is that allowed? When we have a negative under the square root, what does that mean? It's imaginary, so I know I'm going to have an I come out of this. X is equal to plus or minus I square root of 16. Because remember, the square root of -1 is equal to I. Here's where the I came from. Do we know the square root of 16? 4. So x is equal to plus or minus 4i. That means x equals 4i, or x equals negative 4i. Your test in here is on Thursday. Technically, unless you're a senior, I will see you tomorrow. Seniors do not report to the school building tomorrow. Freshmen, sophomore, juniors all do. All throughout the morning, freshman, sophomore, junior will be doing the PSAT test. And my guess is that by the time I see you guys, you will have had lunch, and everybody's still going to be pretty much brain dead from 4 hours of testing. So tomorrow in class, you have this time to take a brain break if that's what you need, to study for the test with me, independently, with a partner. I'm not going to do anything led up at the front, but I'm here as a resource. If you are totally fried and you can't focus on studying tomorrow, that's okay. All right? But I do want to make sure that you know that if you're in here and you're like, man, I really wish that she would help me study for the test, I'm here and I will still help you study for the test if you want me to, okay? I'm just not going to do anything formal. We're not going to do bell work. We're not going to go through problems together as a class. But if you want to work with me, I will work with you, okay? So that being said, today is our last day as a group to study for your test. I want to take any requests that you guys have off of your actual review. We went through problem number 1 together as a group yesterday. Any of the other problems that are in this packet, I am happy to go over. Number 7, absolutely. Don't forget, I made a note of this yesterday. Sorry, I just had to skip past it as I'm going over to number 7. On number 4, don't forget that was supposed to be a minus in front of the 21, not a plus. Make sure you've made that change on yours, otherwise it won't work. So make sure that yours is subtraction there. Number 7. Very last sentence of this tells me what we're trying to find. What are we trying to get to on number 7? The vertex. The vertex of a parabola is always going to be HK. The way we're going to find H, because that will be our first piece, to find H, we're going to use our axis of symmetry formula right here. Negative B over 2A. That'll find the first piece. All right, so if I have x equals negative b, what are we going to put in the place of b? Which of these numbers over here in the equation is b? 192 is my b value, so that goes up in my numerator, 192. What do I put in the spot down here for A? Negative 32. So in the numerator, I have negative 192. In the denominator, I have negative 64. Pop that into your calculator and tell me what you get. Negative 192 divided by negative 64. 3. this is our h value. So far on the vertex, I know this part of it. We still need to find k. We have to find h first, but then to find k, we will sub our h value into the equation. So our equation, negative 32, and then it has t squared, so that's where we're going to make our substitution. Plus 192, and then it has another t, so we're going to substitute again. Plus 9. What am I going to put in these two open spots where I said we're going to substitute? 3. We put our h value in there. What is 3 squared? 9. So I have negative 32 times 9 plus 192 times 3 plus 9. What is negative 32 times 9? Negative 288. What is 192 times 3? 576 plus 9. So now I just need to combine those things together on my calculator. $297. This is our k value. Then we're supposed to interpret this in context. It says the projectile reaches a height of blank feet, blank seconds after launch. Which one of those two numbers do you think is the height of the rocket? 297. 297 is our height. So 3 must be what? Yes, 3 seconds. That is our time. Here's another way that I can know for sure that I'm interpreting this correctly. If you go back up and look at the equation, did they use x's and y's? No. They used what variables? T. But that is normally where we have our x's, right? So I know that they're using t for time in the same spot where we normally use an x. That's how I knew that first number, the 3, had to be my time, because an ordered pair always tells me the x first and then the y. Does that make sense? All right. What else would you guys like to see? Number 2? Absolutely. All right, so there's a couple things that I would use to help me figure this out. Yes, you may. All of these have been written using our general form, right? ABC form. What does C always tell me? This is my y-intercept. My A value, which is the same for all 3 forms, What kinds of things does A tell us about? Yep, it tells us about stretches, about compressions, and whether or not it has reflected upside down. If A is a positive number, then it opens up like a cup. And if A is a negative number, then it opens down like a frown. Looking at our graphs, do we have any that are down like a frown? G is down. E is down. So this one opens down. Do any of the others open down? F opens down. Looking at the equations, which of those equations open down? B. I see this negative right here, and so I know it opens down. Do any of the others open down? D also opens down because it's got this negative. We've got our y-intercepts on the ends. Here's my y-intercept for this one. Y-intercept. Look at the two that you told me opened down, the two graphs. What are the y-intercepts on the two graphs that open down? Positive 8 on both of them. So I'm going to need a little bit more. I know that one of those is B and one of those is D. They've got the same y-intercept. They both open down. What's different about those two graphs? Yes, positive 2x, negative 2x. When you look at the graphs, what's different between the two graphs? One's shifted over. So what I'm looking at here is my axis of symmetry. This one, the axis of symmetry, is where? Where does it hit the x-axis at? Positive 1. For my axis of symmetry. Guys, music needs to be off. I can hear it all the way up here. I don't know who's got the music on, but it's got to go off. Turn it off, please. For the other graph, as I go to look at my axis of symmetry there, where does this one go through the x-axis at? Negative 1. How do I determine which one goes with which equation? What do I use? Positive and negative, yes, but I can't just grab the positive one and put it with the positive graph necessarily. I'm going to use this axis of symmetry formula right here. That will help me find the x part of the vertex, yes. This gives me my h value. This is the axis of symmetry formula. This one is super important. I will give it to you on the test. Make sure you know all the things you can use it for. It tells you h of the vertex, where that axis of symmetry is. All right, so I'm going to use that. Let's go to B first here. So x equals negative b over 2a. What's the b value here? Negative 2 over 2a. What is our a value? Negative 1. So in my numerator, I have negative 2. And what do I have in the denominator? What is negative 2 divided by negative 2? 1. So x equals 1 is my axis of symmetry. Which one of those graphs had an axis of symmetry at 1? E. So this one goes with equation B. Just for practice, let's do axis of symmetry on D because I want to make sure that we know how to do it. What is our value for B this time? Negative 2 over 2 times our A value. What's A here? Negative 1. What is it when it's a negative and a negative like this? Positive. So I'm going to have a positive 2 in my numerator, but what down in my denominator? Negative. What is 2 divided by negative 2? Negative 1. So x is negative 1, which means it goes with graph F. Do you guys want to do G and H also? Or do you want to try those on your own?
Can we try it and then review it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Why don't you give those guys a try and then tell me which one A goes with, which one C goes with. You could use factored form, absolutely. Yeah, if you had decided that you wanted to factor these, yes, you could do that. And then if you chose to factor them, what would you be looking for on the graph then? The x-intercepts, yes. That is another completely valid way that you could go about figuring out which ones match. Yep. On A, what is the value for B that we're going to substitute in? Negative 2. What is our value for A there? What is the value for A on equation A? 1. So up in the numerator, I've got negative and negative, which means what? Positive. So I have 2 over 2, which reduces down to positive 1. So I want the one that has an axis of symmetry of 1. Which of our remaining graphs, G or H, has an axis of symmetry that is 1? H. So that's going to go with this graph right here, because we've got our axis of symmetry. Process of elimination tells me that this one has to be D. C. Thank you. I knew it was the last one. My brain just told me that that had to be D. Thank you for correcting me. When I come down here and I do my axis of symmetry, what am I putting in for B here? Positive 2. Negative is part of my formula, though. So I have a negative 2 in my numerator and a positive 2 in my denominator. So I get an axis of symmetry of negative 1. And that's how I knew that it had to be this one. So several things you can look for when it comes to the graphs. Check your A values so you know whether it opens up or down. That's the first thing that I would do, especially if it's a multiple choice and you're trying to get rid of possibilities. Does it open up? Does it open down? I would check my y-intercept, because sometimes, like if I only give you one equation and I say which graph does this match, without having to do any computation at all, you can check your C value. Where does that hit the y-axis at? Yes, ma'am.
For this test, will you have
The formula's up at the top? Yes.
will you have them on each question?
It'll be at the top of every page. Yes. Thank you. Got it. They won't be labeled with what they are. You'll need to know which ones, like what you use them for, but they will be up at the top of every single page of the test. Yes. What else would you guys like to look at? Number 8. If you're going to use quadratic formula, must be equal to 0. There are 2 of the solving methods that we've talked about that have to be equal to 0. Quadratic formula is one of them, and factoring is the other. So the first thing we need to do is get this one equal to 0. How do I get it equal to 0? Subtract 8 from both sides. All right, so I have x squared plus 12x minus 8 equals 0. Once it's equal to 0, I can identify A, B, and C. Which piece of this is A? X squared. I want the number in front of x squared to substitute in. What's the number in front of my x squared? 1. So A is 1. What's my value for B?
12x.
Yep. 12 is my value for B. What's my value for C? Negative 8. So the first thing I always do is I find the discriminant.
Wait,
Yep.
how did you get the negative 8 number?
Has to be equal to 0. It was not equal to 0. It was equal to 8 before. You cannot use quadratic formula unless it's equal to 0.
So you moved the 8.
Yep, we subtracted it from both sides. I made it cancel on the right so that it could be on the same side as all the other pieces. So b squared minus 4ac is my discriminant. That's the part that goes underneath the radical. What did you say we're using for b? 12. So I'm going to take 12 and square it. Minus 4 times, what did you tell me a was again? 1. Remember, we want just the numbers when we're doing this part. Yep. And what are we putting in for C? -8. If you grab a calculator, one of my yellow calculators, and you type it in just like this with the parentheses in there, it will give you the discriminant. What do we get when we type this whole thing in? Got to use your parentheses. $176. This part goes under the radical. All right, so my quadratic formula, x equals fraction bar, negative, and then we make a substitution, plus or minus my radical, all over 2, and we make a substitution. What do I put right here? 176. What am I going to put right here, though? I put 12 there, because when I look at my quadratic formula, it says negative and then b. So that's where I put that 12. What goes inside the parentheses down here on the bottom? 1. All right, so I know I have x equals, this is going to be -12 plus or minus. Do you guys know the square root of 176 just off the top of your head? Yeah, I don't either. Let's try to break it down. Square root of 176. That's a pretty big number, but something I notice about it is that it's even. What has to go into it if it's even? 2. What is 176 divided by 2? 88. Oh, I like 88. I know things that'll multiply to 88. Anytime I see double numbers like this, what goes into it? 11. So I have 2 times, this would be what, 8 times 11 for 88? I see something I kind of like here. This is what I'm looking at. What's 2 times 8? Why do I like 16? I know the square root of 16. So this is 16 times 11 under my square root. So the square root of 16 times the square root of 11. Square root of 16 is what? 4. Can we break down 11 anymore? Then it just stays square root 11. All right. Let me scrunch this all together a little bit so that I have just a little bit more room. So I have 4 square root of 11 here. Do I have a fraction? Yes. How many things on top do I have that are separated by pluses or minuses? 2. I have 2 terms in my numerator. So I have to distribute that division the same way I would distribute with multiplication. Both pieces go over the 2. Can you tell me what -12 divided by 2 is? -6. Plus or minus, is the 11 outside of the square root? No. Are these 2 pieces both under square roots? Then I can't touch those at all. Are these both under square roots? No. I can reduce those. What's 4 divided by 2? 2. So one of my solutions is -6 plus 2 square root of 11 The other one is negative 6 minus 2 square root of 11. How do I get the decimal form? How do I get the decimals? Because down here it wanted me to round to 3 decimal places. How do I get that? Plug it in the calculator. If you put it in the calculator and you hit enter and it still has radicals, what do? Hit the arrow button right above the enter key. If I'm not mistaken, it was 0.633 and negative 12.633. The videos from 4th period, 5th period, 6th period will all be posted today, so you guys can watch if you want to, because I went over different questions in different classes.